I would like to welcome you all and thank you so much for attending Unearth's Disaster Recovery, Putting Recovery First webinar. I'm Lisa Sisson, the founder of Unearth, and today, obviously, I'm joined by Em McKenzie, our strategist, advisor, and change leadership specialist. We both really appreciate you all making the time to join us today. Though before we get underway, I would like to show my respects and acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands from where I meet today, the Ku-ring-gai region, and their elders past and present. I acknowledge all those traditional owners across our country and their connection to this beautiful land. I would also like to acknowledge any Aboriginal people that are joining us today. So thank you all for coming. Through today's session, if you would like to, if you have any questions, feel free to put them into the chat. We may actually answer some of those questions as we go through the session. Otherwise, we will answer everyone's questions towards the end. And for those of you who are not so familiar with Unearth, well, we're a specialised risk consultancy company founded back in 2013. We have been really privileged to work across both the public and private sectors, including some of Australia's largest and most recognised brands. Though today, you are here joining us on a topic that's incredibly close to Ian and my heart. And you were taking the first step to really understanding the importance of putting recovery first within the disaster recovery space. This topic, is not only is it important, it's very personal. And I think it is for everyone who's probably attending today, because we're talking about the lives of people and families and communities, which is something that we're all a part of. And I sense that for each of us, you've got a strong connection to this as well, because many of you are actually working within areas of helping to protect communities. That's the job you've actually chosen. Though for us, this topic, as I said, is incredibly personal. It's definitely not political in any shape or form, and neither is our discussion today. What we do know, though, it's really, really important to get this right. There are big stakes involved in this. And especially for the Unearth team, because we actually have a shared passion for our purpose, which is our collective in creating a safer world. We just happen to do it one community, one workplace at a time. We believe that everybody has the right to feel safe, well, which is why our commitment to our clients is to protect the house. And the house is a metaphor for our organisation, for an organisation or a department or a community. And we just happen to use our skills, influence and reach to help our clients, which is why it underpins our social purpose and drives towards us looking to want to create a safer world. So today you're here because we want to challenge you and the traditional thinking around about recovery and the myth that PPRR, so prevention, preparedness, response, recovery, is somehow provides a way to decompartmentalize our thinking and actions, and how that approach actually disadvantages, perhaps even harms our more vulnerable. So today we would like to challenge you to think differently about how we engage our communities, what participative discussion making really means, because that is what locally led, locally focused, locally centred, or whatever other sort of term you want to use needs to be about. But before I hand over to Ian, I also just wanted to share with you that Ian and I were actually planning this webinar last year. We were originally going to do it last year, but we realised there was a lot of fatigue happening with webinars last year. I think a lot of us were having that challenge. So we thought we would hold off until March this year, and also off the back of a plane trip I had up to Queensland in February, which I actually did take up in February under blue skies initially. And the reason that I'm actually raising this was because while I was up there, we're having conversations, in fact, the same topic we're talking about today, while I was up there traveling with Ian, and I know there's a lot of people that we met with today that are here today, so thank you for being here. But while I was up there having this conversation, what happened before us was that those beautiful blue skies that Queensland is known for actually turned dark, and the rain began and the floods happened. And so for me, there were a couple of things that sort of played out when I sort of headed back to Sydney, and a couple of reasons that I'm raising it. One was that the scenario that one of the scenarios we were talking about actually played out in front of our very eyes, which is really was quite heartbreaking for me, which is also why I came back to Sydney and wrote a LinkedIn article about it, calling it exactly When Blue Skies Turn Dark, because it's that knowing that those communities, those families suddenly had no time, that obviously this event, this tragedy was before them. And the other reason I'm sort of mentioning this is because we've been talking about the whole Under Blue Skies for quite some time, and we've been sharing our messaging for quite a while. And it hasn't, so us raising it today and having this event today isn't in the wake of the event. This is really at the core of our work, our commitment to protect the house, and our belief that risk starts and ends with people, which is why people are at the center and the heart of everything that we do, and our approach. And our focus is to really provide a new perspective on risk. So I'm about to hand over to Ian, but for those of you who may not be familiar with Ian, which I don't think there'll be too many, he's recognized for his wealth of experience, having been in the public sector for 40 odd years. So sorry, Ian. First as a first responder, Deputy Commissioner up in Queensland of Fire and Rescue Services. He was the first Inspector General of Emergency Management up in Queensland. He's also been the senior advisor, to the Commonwealth's Minister for Emergency Management, David Littleproud, when he was on board, and Ian supported him through the Black Summer bushfires. Ian's also, led reviews into some of the nation's largest natural disasters. So Ian's experience plus his passion, and something that we both share, is to improve outcomes for people and their communities. Ian is someone who has listened to many stories over the years of individuals going through some of the most trying times, like many people are right now, as we know, are going through some really trying times. So Ian's heard a lot of those stories. And Ian's mantra that deeply resonates is that it doesn't matter how we feel about the job that we've done. What matters is how we have made others feel. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Ian and say thank you again for everyone for being here. And Ian, over to you.
Thank you, Lisa, for that introduction. And good morning to everyone. I know, all my previous colleagues and friends and others from across the country and indeed across the ditch. So welcome to New Zealand as well this morning. Firstly, can I respectfully acknowledge the people of the Yugambeh language region, the traditional owners of the land on which I am today, and pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging, and indeed all those traditional owners across the country that might be joining us virtually today, or who are in areas that are deeply affected by current events. So today I want to talk about something which I think we should all agree is our collective goal. And as large and as altruistic as it sounds, it is about creating a safer world. And as Lisa said, that's what the company she founded is all about. Specifically, I want to challenge you, and I want to challenge our collective thinking and our traditional thinking about how disaster recovery works. And what I describe is the myth of disaster recovery. And that's a word that we use quite a bit just to provoke and challenge discussion. Because when it comes to disaster recovery, it's not about houses, it's about homes. And that simple shift in thinking alone is critical to the way that we help people. It's not about business premises, it's not about jobs, it's about people's ability to make income, meet mortgages, maintain their dignity. Not about electricity, water, roads or sewerage, but about livability. And one that's close to my heart again over the last 48 hours, it's not about mobile phone towers. It's about connectedness of community. So a mobile phone tower goes out for 48 hours. It's not about loss of phone calls or data. It's about loss of capability, of ability for people to stay connected and know what's going on. It's not about consequence management. And it is all about consequence management, not about us being busy. It's not about us telling people what we have done. It's about people telling us how we have done. So why do I want to challenge you on that? Because after 40 years of working in this industry at all different aspects, whether it's operational, bureaucratic, or on the policy side, or through Black Summer, as Lisa said, in the political side with the minister, I'm tired. I'm tired of us watching us do the same thing. Tired of us watching us following the same playbook and hoping for a different outcome. Now, there is no doubt that we are well practiced, well rehearsed. We're talking today to some of the best people in the country, and I've seen the list of who's online. But mostly we don't do as well as we can, or as well as we should. And we've only got to watch the news again this morning, and we'll all sit back and say the media dramatise things, but watch the news again this morning and you'll see the same feelings appear. So it's that I say, if we keep delivering the same things in the same way, we can't be surprised when we get the same result. We can't be surprised when you have the same media stories, the same headlines on the front page of the paper, the same dramatic sound bites of those forgotten, disadvantaged, vulnerable, or just plain angry people. Because if restore, repair, replace and rebuild is all we do, all we're going to do is repeat the disaster again and again. We've got good systems and good people, but they are, I'll challenge you, Matt, systems to manage disruption. They are systems to manage impacts. They are systems that largely restore the status quo. And let's just leave the build back argument discussion just for a few minutes, but I will come back to that. Because just repairing or rebuilding somebody's house or even buying it back doesn't necessarily fix things. There will be other consequences for the people from that home. They might be mental health issues, unemployment, domestic violence, substance abuse, consequences that we can't wait to manifest. Consequences we need to have thought of, planned for, and be prepared to act early on. Now, the United Nations and indeed ADA outline that the recovery outcome should avoid or reduce future risk. It's not just about standing up those dominoes again. If that's all we do, then next time they fall, guess what? They end up in the same place. But language is so important. And note the comma placement in the last bit of that quote. It means that all effort needs to avoid or reduce future risk, not just that last phrase of building back better. But often it's only if considered as part of the build back better. And that just provides yet another excuse. We couldn't reduce risk because there was no build back better funding. We have to think beyond that. And that, of course, raises that very topical issue of mitigation. Now, mitigation is all about risk and risk reduction. And it's all about recognising and realising each and every opportunity that comes along and actively looking for them and acting on them. And of course, though it's a subject that is often weaponised, there is nothing easier after an event, again, watch the news this morning, than to say what should have been done, what could have been done, or even there'll be some saying what we would have done. Arguments and discussions after events are often framed in terms like, if only the government had built levees, built a bigger dam, mandated fireproof building material. But all of this has a very simple but very significant flaw. It all deals with protecting what exists, when the question we need to be asking ourselves first is what should exist. Now, I commented recently on an article in the Sydney Morning Herald, and that article had some extreme views, absolutely, but nonetheless raised a conversation that we need to have. Should we allow even building back better if it's building back in harm's way, regardless of what we build back and whether it's better? Now, mitigation becomes populist after an event. It becomes political, and the media thrive on it. What has or hasn't been spent, what funds are or are not available, And these are just points that the public cannot be expected to separate the truth from maybe the not so true. So questioning what should exist before spending to protect what is already there is vital. And I think the fundamental difference in the way that we should be thinking. And levies, and this time are a perfect example. We talk about building flood levies to protect what's already there. I can tell you in central Queensland, I have seen property owners build levies to protect their property, allegedly I'll say, but only to increase the impact on their neighbour. We're fine, we don't really care where the water goes after that. I've seen an individual homeowner build a levee around their entire home, only for it to fill with the rainwater from within. The notion that it's possible to remove risk through mitigation needs to be challenged. Higher dam walls don't prevent floods. In the words of the engineers, they will attenuate the floodwater. Now, does the public understand that? I'm not sure that we would necessarily understand it in the terms the engineers use. Because remember, when a dam is full, what goes in must come out. And there was no better example to me that I've experienced when I reviewed the Callide Creek flood event below the dam, and the tragic story of a young couple in their 20s who had bought their most idyllic, picturesque plot of land on a bend in the Callide Creek. They had built their dream home. It was about 1 kilometre downstream from the dam wall. And as the water rose into the house that night, and for them without any warning, and they drove out, and the first car that drove out had the mother and children, the second car, the father, and they waved to the father. Everyone was okay, let me reinforce that. But as his car got swept away behind them, thankfully everyone was okay. But they were surprised. As I said, in their 20s, born perhaps 1990, below a dam which had just before that, had the dam wall increased in a time of the millennial drought. They had never experienced that dam being full. So guess what this event was to them? It was unprecedented. Now, was it unprecedented? Absolutely not. That area, that catchment, that creek has flooded many, many times, and there's many buildings and trees and markers along the road downstream that show the different years and just what height it had reached. So it wasn't unprecedented. It was to them. And will it happen again? Then yes is the simple answer. So what about that word unprecedented? And just think to yourself, how many times have I heard it and in what context? I heard it again this morning. And I'll challenge you. It's almost as if that word has become an excuse or a reason for not being prepared, for not having considered it, and for not having plans to deal with it. Now, the extension of that, and I've heard this word many times at conferences, or this phrase, is failures of imagination. In after action reviews and lessons learned forums, we hear about failures of imagination. Well, my challenge to you is that that's no longer acceptable. For us not to consider the unprecedented, I'd suggest is unforgivable. Failure to plan for the unprecedented, I'd go as far as saying is negligent. And failing to involve the community in developing that plan, failure to share the plan with the community, is failing the community itself. So why is this important? We all get caught up in the noise, the emotion, the media swarm, the media storm, and the politics of things. And amongst that, sometimes it's hard to remember what this is all about. And it is all about people. And that's what our focus needs to be on. As I said, it's not about houses, it's about the homes people live in. And that's the fundamental shift in thinking that will refocus us from dealing with the impact on things to the consequences for people. And if we believe it's all about people and community, then we should also recognise their right to be part of the decision processes. rather than simply be told what will be done to their community to recover. So why do we want to raise this now, and why do we want to challenge? Why do we want to change what we do? Very simple, because the world is changing. Now, there's things that we know. We know that there's climate change. We know that climate change will change our business. So let's get on with understanding the consequences of it and be ready for that future, rather than get caught up in the philosophical and academic arguments of climate change. There's a lot of very capable people, and probably some not so capable people, that will have comments and discussions on that topic. We need to focus on and understand what's important for people because of it, making sure there are no surprises and preparing them for the future that will be. Because we know what's going to happen, whether it's the increased risk of more frequent cyclones, greater impact and greater consequences. There should be no surprises in this. Think about this. Right now, where I'm sitting, I am on about the same latitude, albeit on the east coast of the country in Queensland, as Kalbarri, a small town in Western Australia. People will remember the town of Kalbarri for Tropical Cyclone Seroja. Now, that line of latitude goes past where I am. I'm about 10 kilometres from the coast, and then it goes into a group of islands in southern Moreton Bay, particularly Russell Island, and Moreton Bay, for people who know it, is at the bottom of a lovely funnel from north to south. So as cyclones track down, so too any storm surge will be exacerbated through that funnel. So what would happen if that cyclone had come to the east coast? Would we be surprised at the impact? Probably. Would we be surprised by the consequences? Definitely. But the Bureau's been telling us for a long time that these events will be more intense, will track further south and be more frequent. Now, in North Queensland, we've seen some great work done to reduce risk and increase resilience through the resilience schemes offered by state and federal governments and supported at local government level, delivering real outcomes for homeowners, insurance policy holders, and the like. And recently, whether we can debate the value of it all we like, but there is now the reinsurance scheme in the far north as well. And I see more debate on that this morning in the press. But have we ever thought about or actioned delivering those schemes for Southeast Queensland, Northern New South Wales, or any other parts of the country, other than in the aftermath of events? And I admit and acknowledge it's easy when looking in the mirror, and that's the challenge of our business. It's about people, and whether that's their employment, their health, their finances, their mental health, their ability to travel, turn on a tap or a light switch or go to bed, it is about them. Now, these things are all predictable, I'm suggesting. The consequences of the impact are predictable. And I have to say, none of it is unprecedented. We might not have experienced personally, the scale might change, but I'll challenge that it's not unprecedented. We've got the information available to do something about it. So how do we embrace risk, leverage off the knowledge that we have, and create opportunities for communities and people? My claim, my contention, our challenge to you is that if there's nothing we can't imagine, that we can't identify, that we can't predict the impact and therefore extrapolate the consequences, then why don't we have plans to overcome these events beforehand? Now, how can I be so sure in what I say? Because we have done it before. We've done it recently. We're doing it now. We did it through the Black Summer fires, the monsoon event of North Queensland. We did it through the 2011 floods. We've done it through Victoria's Black Saturday fires and their recent storm events. There is a wealth of data to know where we've had to expend our time, our effort, money, and other resources, what schemes we had to put in place, how good those schemes were, whether they achieved it. And yet we reinvent or seem to reinvent these time and time again. Now, I can sense you sitting there murmuring and saying, but we do have recovery plans. And I am always happy to be proven wrong, and I'm sure some watching have very good recovery plans. But usually when people say to me, but we have a recovery plan, I will challenge it. People have said to me, we can't plan for recovery until we know the damage. Yet when I ask what will happen when a cyclone, say, hits Cairns, good morning to Cairns disaster managers, I know that Sue and others can tell me for a particular storm surge height what the impacts will probably be in terms of people, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of power loss, water loss, houses inundated. We know these statistics. So by good planning, we can have really good recovery plans as well. Where I live, the recent water levels of 3 weeks ago were within centimetres of the 2017 event. So my challenge in those sort of areas is, do we really need to go out and conduct rapid damage assessments and start from scratch? Or can we pull out the plans from the previous event as the starting point? Because I can tell you the houses that were inundated in my street were exactly the same houses inundated 5 years ago. And for that level of flood will be again next time, because there will be a next time. We spend too much time and lose too much time while we verify and validate. So let's have the detailed plans available for that. We've got great response plans. We know how we're going to respond. We know how we're going to provide relief in that immediate aftermath. We know that there'll be a need for evacuation centres. We get that. I talked to a major council recently at an event around, we have great plans for evacuation centres and how to run them, but did we have a plan for mid to long term to deal with the displaced people that are out of their homes for longer times? So I challenge you to do the same thing that I have done. And I know some of you have already done this. Scan the publicly available recovery plans across the country, at random if you like, or targeted, and you'll come up with some similar results that I did. Now remove the names from these 4 different extracts from recovery plans, but to have in your recovery plan something that says financial management in recovery funding is not available for recovery planning. However, funding will be available after an event, is what they're virtually saying. I just can't fathom. To have a plan that only deals with the immediate aftermath, I just don't get. To actually put a page in and to say it's intentionally left blank to insert the local recovery plan means that all you have is a plan to plan. Now, there are some really good templates that have been developed and some really good actions that are there and listed in local recovery planning templates, but they are templates. My contention again is, if we can do scenarios, come up with exercises and plan things, let's use that data to work out exactly what the recovery plans will be and have them in the top drawer. But it's not a job just for us. So, and why aren't, in developing these plans, we consulting more with the community beforehand? Being brave enough to have the debates between political rivals to get a bipartisan approach beforehand. I know from certain areas in the aftermath of the Black Summer fires, I've seen federal, state and local politicians all in vigorous disagreement around what the best thing for their community is, because they've been elected and they know. Well, who was missing in that room was in fact the community. Imagine having those debates now. Imagine debating and agreeing on the buyback scheme for a town today before it happened. I'm sure in the next coming weeks there's going to be vigorous debate around Lismore and other areas about the future.
Imagine having contracts in place to clean up today before the fires. For those in areas affected by the Black Summer fires, you might remember it was months after the fires before cleanup contracts were put in place in various states across the country. Why? Because it hadn't been thought of on that scale beforehand. Tenders hadn't been done, contracts hadn't been agreed. There was arguing between state, local and federal levels about who was going to fund. There were questions about whether insurance companies should be funding cleanup or it's part of the policy. And the end question was, who cares? It's not the time to be having these arguments when this is all predictable. We know from bushfires, if there's going to be bushfires, there's going to be floods, there's going to be other events, well, then cleanup is a major issue. And the contract should be there in the top drawer ready to enact. We're hearing that these mega fires are going to be more often, they're going to happen across the country. Then cleanup is going to have to happen across the country, and we need these contracts. A plan to plan is not acceptable. So if we can agree that people need to be our first and most important thought as we develop recovery plans, we need to think about how they view us. And here, folks, is the not so good news. If anyone follows the Edelman surveys issued annually on trust, it's done across the world and then broken down into countries, this is Australia's result this year. So before you even start, 2/3 of the population are thinking that they do not trust the media, business leaders, political or government figures. So what? Well, what it means is that the first thing you say had better be the truth, and no matter how hard to swallow, the communications had better be consistent. So there is no point talking about unprecedented events, 1 in 100-year events, which is a term I'd just like to kick to the curb completely. Be honest and tell them what's going to happen. Now, as we go into recovery, I said we have good systems and we have fairly common understanding, and you usually deal with what we call the pillars of recovery. Unfortunately, that means that we do tend to compartmentalise. Now, there is obviously, I will say, an increasing acceptance of the need for community engagement through the process. However, the notion of participative governance is something that's much least accepted and something that we need to move to. And I'm not going to get into the argument about whether it's community-driven, community-led, community-focused, it's about honest, authentic engagement. The leadership, decision-making, prioritisation, financial control, messaging and reporting is typically controlled by government. And there are often conflicts between levels of government and lack of transparency for those on the ground being served. You know, interdisciplinarity is hard to say, let alone understand or practice, but it has to be about true engagement across and proper planning. We have structures and systems and we make the situation fit to it. We compartmentalise and respond to things that we see. We count damage, we list impact, we make tables, graphs and maps, and we group problems by function. The issue with that is we can tend to solve problems by function. So that's where we call the pillars of recovery another myth. Society is not divided up into pillars. Society is a complex system. And I challenge anyone to come up with any decision taken around built infrastructure, the natural environment, transport, supply chains, or the economic recovery that does not have an impact on people. And that's why people need to be at the centre of every decision and every part of leadership we provide through that recovery. Now, I said we've got systems that we understand, and this is taken directly from ADA. I can't see my list. I'm not sure if we've got a representation from ADA on this morning, but good morning if you're there. And I've seen the diagram again this week appear in social media. And this is the cycle of recovery. It's very predictable. The emotions of the public are predictable. And so is the long tail of recovery. But I have to ask and challenge whether or not this is a self-fulfilled prophecy. What do I mean? Well, this is what we teach. We're teaching what to expect, not how to break the cycle. So with the greatest respect, what we've got to be doing is trying to change that, getting rid of the disappointment and the frustration, supporting people more, bulldozing obstacles that are in play, making the tail of recovery both shorter and the depths that it affects people shallower. And that's our goal. Our goal is to flatten that curve and shorten this curve. But first, we need to focus and reshape how we think about recovery. We know we want to shorten timeframes and lessen the impact of support people. But what's the point of promising people we'll get them back to what was when we know it will happen again? Remember the Edelman survey and the fact, the cold hard fact, that 2/3 of the people just don't trust us. That's why we believe we need to put recovery first and talk about and plan for it today. So how do we do that? It's a mix of philosophical change, a deep understanding of the community profile, authentic community engagement, imagination, and commitment to drive risk down and resilience up. First and foremost, it's a shift in thinking to accept there are no pillars. They are dimensions of this complex system that we call society. And all recovery plans should have disaster risk reduction as the most basic part. People need to be the first and the last consideration. People with human, social, and cultural needs, wants, and biases. We need to recognise that there is no single decision we take in any of these dimensions that does not impact on people in some way, shape, or form. And by doing that, we can achieve that national goal of making sure that decisions we make are the right ones, that our investments that we make are the best ones, that we've got the governance processes around to deliver. And at the end of the day, if we can do that with our communities, for our communities, we're doing a pretty good job. How do we do that? It comes back to that word consequences. It's about understanding the consequences and using them to design the future that the community want and need. So we work to develop a deep understanding of the community and profile it across all those dimensions, discovering what is already known and discovering what is not known, and asking questions about what the community relies on. Discovering what are the consequences if they're not there. What will break the community? What data do we have or not have access to? And ask each of the questions that we need in the context of people and what does it mean for them? And mapping those important aspects across those dimensions. And to understand, though, it's essential to engage communities in preparing for that post-disaster future. So these are not questions that we can ask or answer individually or separately, but we need to have that profile and engage the community so we can truly analyse that data. We can identify the vulnerabilities, can facilitate that free speech. We create a safe zone. That's one of our key things, where we can get that bipartisan discussion and agreement. The community are the ones that are there before, during, and after. And there was a larger-than-life mayor in Queensland around the Noosa area that used to say that regularly, and nothing has struck a stronger chord with me. The community are the ones that are there before, during, and after. As much as we like to think of us, and I'm an ex-blue and red light person, everyone knows, but we are not the first responders. The community are the first responders, and they are the last responders. Because even after all our recovery programs are in play, they are still the ones there trying to deal with the consequences of the event. That community have a right to say what the community will look like after the recovery efforts are over. Now, that can't be achieved by starting to talk with them after an event. when emotions are high, when feelings are running strong. That conversation has to happen today under blue skies. The importance cannot be underestimated. Talk to local recovery committees and you'll hear all manner of stories and debates about things as simple as language being taken for granted. What does shared responsibility mean? I've got to say, to many of those, it means how do I share blame and who should have done better? Not after the event, it must be done the months and the years to have those discussions, debates, disagreements if we need, resolve them and move forward knowing what the future looks like. So what about risk? We've seen many ways that risk can be categorised, assessed, considered, and even referred. National systems, international systems, state-based systems, which one is right? I'm not going to have the argument about none of them, all of them. I'll leave the rhetorical question to you. But talk to the public and they know risks almost intuitively. After the fires of Black Summer, there's one town, you'll all remember it probably for the wrong reasons from the news, with the Prime Minister there, Cobargo. I've got to say, you know, many of the businesses in the main street of that town were damaged or destroyed by the fire. One person in the town knew exactly what was important, the publican. And he knew that as the fire descended on that town, the most important thing was not any of those businesses, it was the bridge that separated one side of town from the other. And if that had not been protected and saved at all costs, then that town would never be able to recover, and neither would the communities further west from that town. So it is about knowing key vulnerabilities. It's about being able to have that discussion. It's about being able to make those decisions in the cold, emotionless times under blue skies. And that's why we'd say planning under blue skies is the most important approach to recovery that we can have. And it's about identifying, facilitating partnerships to expose those vulnerabilities and make the right decisions. Now, don't think this is too hard. We already do this. We develop future-facing plans all the time. We use accepted scales to plan for greater livability for our citizens, things like the Mercer livability scale. And how many are pulled out when we talk recovery and we need to recovery? There's a challenge. The Mercer scale talks about all of these points as being important for a truly livable community, and we rate communities across the world according to these scales. I don't know that I've ever necessarily seen this or the discussion about livability pulled out in a recovery meeting. I said we plan at all levels of government all the time, and yet we enter recovery mode and we tend to forget most of these plans. These plans exist now if we look in our filing systems. Matt, I think you're online. I'll pull out City of Ipswich just as an example. But there's a huge number of plans there that can be used in terms of our sustainability, our infrastructure, our utilities. What parks do we want in the future? These are all opportunities sitting in the top drawer with the trigger there now for you as disasters unfold. These are the things that we want to move to after an event. And yet we overlook them. And can I say, often we have the wrong people in the room when it comes to recovery. We need the political and the bureaucratic, absolutely, but let's move quickly to the community members in the room. So our role from here is helping one community at a time to prepare for a new future and to be ready to recover even if they face their unprecedented event. We create a safe collaboration zone to facilitate that understanding of risk. We facilitate the development of community profile, facilitate free, safe and non-partisan discussions, expose the hazards, vulnerabilities and the consequences, talk about opportunities and how to get rid of blockages and issues to make the world a safer place, one community at a time, about turning vulnerability into opportunity. And Lisa, I think that's a good time to hand it back to you and for us to take some questions wherever we can.
Absolutely. So if anyone does have any questions that they'd like to ask, feel free to put them into the chat box. I think, Ian, you might want to look at Nathan Peake's comment there too, in the comments, and talking about it's around the monitoring and the evaluation process, as led them to believe that the recovery plans actually work. So maybe you might want to add some commentary around that.
Other than to applaud you, Nathan, absolutely. Monitoring and evaluation seems to be that key part that's forgotten about oh so quickly. We'll have a talk about having processes, but I don't know where I can go now and pull up a list of an evaluation of programs that were put in place and how effective they've been, other than we'll have any number of graphs, dollars delivered, farmers that have taken up grants, loans, etc. But a true monitoring, I'm not so sure.
And let me ask, does anybody else have any questions that you might want to ask us while we're here now? It's a wonderful opportunity.
And that's
Hi, Lisa. It's George Karajanakis from Insurance Australia Group. Thank you for your presentation, Ian, and thank you, Lisa, for organising it. A question for you, Ian. Of course, we're, as the insurance company, in the middle of the biggest flood event we've seen in a very long time. The government had the opportunity in the budget to put more money into risk reduction, as you quite rightly point out. It's the foundation of understanding risks. They haven't done that. The Queensland government's come out with quite an ambitious and very expensive program. So I'd like your view on, if you can, on the Queensland proposal, which is roughly $800 million, and they want the Commonwealth to co-contribute to that. But also in the context of that, what I guess is again disappointing is that New South Wales and Queensland are not coordinating, because this event has covered Southeast Queensland and Northern New South Wales. So again, your comment on the lack of coordination across states and indeed no leadership by the Commonwealth.
If I just echo your comments, George, but absolutely. Look, there is nothing more frustrating. And you remember our comments of several years ago, where I used to use the Tweed River as the example, just in relief measures, if nothing else. People living on one side of the Tweed River, funny thing about floodwater, it goes to the same level. So, if a house on one side floods, the house at the same level on the other side floods the same, and yet Queenslanders got cash relief, and to use the colloquial term, people in New South Wales got a blanket and a can of baked beans. And now on that larger scale, in Queensland's proposal, without knowing the exact details of it, the quantum seems good. Any money seems good. How it will be targeted is the most important things. The annoying part that this discussion is happening now is so frustrating. If people felt so passionate about this and want to get on soapboxes, whether it's the Morrison government or the WA government, I don't care who it is, then why weren't they doing it under blue skies? Why weren't they doing it a year ago? Why, in the aftermath of the Royal Commission, weren't we having these public, vigorous debates, if need be, to develop our plans? And now suddenly say, as I said, after the event, mitigation becomes populist and it becomes a weapon. We had Labor, which I thought was a great announcement, coming out and saying, we'll use the full emergency response fund of $200 million a year on mitigation. I thought the Morrison government would at least echo that, but I haven't seen it. I think that's a good start. Sadly, not everyone will, to try and explain the intricacies of that fund. It's a long-term government financial fund. It used to be an education fund. It's difficult, and you and I, George, know that even $200 million a year is a drop in the ocean. So I echo your comments. I think the plans to have the time to have these discussions on plans is, I'll say now, other than those communities affected. those communities that are watching it unfold should be taking these actions, having these arguments today under blue skies.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, George, too, for actually asking the question, right? So I really appreciate that. Is there anybody else who has any other questions?
Good morning, all. Russell Dippy here from South Australia. Hello, Ian. Thanks for your
Hey,
presentation. Hi, mate. You mentioned in your opening comments about moving away from PPRR. I'm going to argue against that, but remind people there were two other paradigms that were mentioned at the same time as comprehensive that seem to have been forgotten. The prepared community being them and us, and also an actual true all hazards approach. So I would probably put it to you that we don't necessarily need to get rid of one of the three. We actually need to do the other two.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I don't think we'll argue that we need to get rid of PPRR. What we will argue is prevention doesn't necessarily need to be the starting point of the continuum. If we think about recovery first, we actually know all the other things are going to lead up to that. And that has to be a prepared, informed community. Absolutely. They need to know where they live. On a really personal note, the house next door to me, where I am this morning, changed ownership 5 weeks ago. The lovely couple moved in. 1 week later, the rain started here. The river came up at the back. The roads were cut. The power went out. They said, oh, the power's gone out. How long do you think that'll be out? And I said, oh, probably 5 days. Had no idea. And I said, you know the phone's going to go out in 4 hours. I said, what? I said, that there's a single mobile phone tower. There's no redundancy. It's reliant on batteries. And you can watch the service degrade over 4 to 6 hours, where at 4 you'll have no phones, at 6 you'll have no connectivity. We are on our own out here. And they said, so what happens if there's an emergency? I said, we deal with it. So, you know, that full disclosure to communities to get them prepared, full engagement with them about recovery before any event. But yes, we're not going to get rid of PPRR, but I'd like to think about recovery first and then continue on.
And I guess also, Ian, the other part is that, you know, focusing in and around the people, as you used your example, is that it is the people that are the first responders, right? So we have emergency responders that come, but it is the people who end up being the first responders.
And I've just put that slide up because I think this is the challenge to all of us. And if we are truly in this business, and I know the people we have are about leaving a legacy and making the world a better place, we're not going to be judged for what we did, but we will be judged for how we make people feel along that journey.
Hello, Ian. It's Nathan Peake again.
Hey, Nathan.
Just wanted to make a comment. Another challenge that we find is that people think without the activation of such funding programs as our DRFA, it's not recovery. So that's one of the challenges that we're facing as well. Without the activation of a funding mechanism, recovery can't go on.
Yep. And the extension of that, even that recovery doesn't mean about reducing the risk for future events. It's just about, you know, putting it back. And that's the real failure. I don't have the quick answers to that, but starting at a local level, engaging with people, making sure that the decision makers as low as possible, and even the people in the community, whether it's a group. When we started this journey, I used to joke with Lisa and say, you know, when we go into a community, the first place is not stopping at the town hall. Council are a window to the community. The first place is the community hall. And, you know, if it's a blackboard on the front door that says the darts club, the bridge club and the bowls club meet there on a Thursday, Wednesday night, they're the people to go and see because they're the people of influence in the town.
Absolutely.
Ian and Lisa, it's Mike Lolback from the Local Government Association in Queensland.
Hey, Mike.
Hi guys. Look, just a quick one. Just thought I'd let you know I'm very legally speaking to you, but I'm driving up a Gympie at the moment to facilitate their debrief into the flooding and the early recovery that they've experienced, as we did last week with the Sunshine Coast, and this is probably more a comment than a question. And in support of the things you're saying, one of the main questions I'm asking for the local disaster management groups to consider is this: how relevant and contemporary was your plan in the response phase? How appropriate is it now during the early stages of recovery? And has it mapped the long-term needs that your local disaster management group across the multiple agencies need in the recovery from the event? So I think that goes a lot to the support of the things you've been saying, Ian, and I'd just be interested in your comment on that.
Look, and Gympie is somewhere, and we all know the challenges they face with flooding as well. One of the questions or one of the observations I think you could make in that is, or questions to ask them in that room as you're conducting the debrief. And I have no idea who's attending that debrief, but it would be interesting to know what the community representation is. And if it is mainly focused on responding agencies, or whether there truly is the full breadth of government agencies and other agencies that are going to be involved in the long tail of that recovery. For instance, are any of the charities in the room? Are any of the social groups of the town in the room? Because their opinions are really the ones that matter. How did we make them feel? And how did we set them up for success? Or are they playing catch up?
Terrific. Thanks, Ian. I'll certainly make use of that.
Thanks, Mike. Good luck.
Well, everyone is, I know we're running out of time. So as we're sort of closing out the session, I just wanted to let you know, I've put both Ian and my contact details into the chat. I've also put in there our Putting Recovery First brochure if by chance you want to download and take a look at that and have further discussions with us. We also have a discovery session you're welcome to sort of book with us. So I put that link in there as well. So please, by all means, if you've got other questions off the back of this or would like to discuss anything further, feel free to reach out to us. We would love to hear from you and get your feedback on today's session as well. And also I can see that Ian's just put up the slide that I'm also going to be co-hosting a courageous leadership discussion in a few weeks. I'm privileged to have Chief Purpose Activist Carolyn Butler-Madden, who'll be speaking with me. So if anyone's interested in wanting to come and join us on that particular issue discussion, so it will be an interactive one, looking around the whole area of courageous leadership, then we would love to invite you to come and be a part of that. Obviously no pressure, but you're more than welcome to. But also I'd like to sincerely thank everyone who has invested time today to come and to listen to Ian and to speak with us today. We really, really appreciate it because we know the importance of this work, and we know that your commitments to helping to keep communities safe. We certainly hope you found this session of value. It looks like from the comments that many of you did. So I'm thrilled by that, but we certainly would welcome more of your feedback. And on that, considering it is now 10:30, I wish you all the best. Please take care and keep safe, and we hope to hear from you soon. Thank you.
Thanks all. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.